Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to Trancelerate's public webinar today, introducing Offering Choice to Patients, an overview of Trancelerate's personal clinical trials framework. Next slide, please. Trancelerate is a non-for-profit entity created to foster collaboration. Our vision is to improve the health of people around the world by accelerating and simplifying the research and development of innovative new therapies. Next slide, please. Since 2012, passionate leaders and subject matter experts from Trancelerate member companies have volunteered their time to apply their distinctive knowledge, insights, passion, and expertise to advance the Trancelerate mission. Together, we have designed, developed, and delivered over 500 nimble and pragmatic solutions to address challenges in the preclinical, clinical, and drug safety space while prioritizing patient needs. Most of our solutions are free for public download and use. Next slide, please. Some basic logistics for today's webinar. Please note that all participants will be muted and have been muted for this call in order to ensure a pleasant listening experience for all other attendees. You can reduce the GoToWebinar control panel for a better view of the presentation by clicking on the orange and white arrow in the upper right corner. We also welcome questions throughout our discussion and presentation today. These can be submitted using the questions function that you should all be able to see in your control panel. Be sure to click send after typing your question in the box so that we can see it. Next slide, please. A few ground rules that I'd like to quickly walk the group through. We want to make sure that this discussion is helpful and answers as many of your questions as we can. So in light of that, a couple of ground rules. Participation, and this is voluntary, as is using Trancelerate's assets and tools. The responsibility for compliance with laws and regulations is owned by the solution adopter, and you do not have to identify what company you work for. Things that we specifically ask you not to discuss. First, what vendor sites and CROs you are either using or not using. Any issues you have with any vendors, sites, or CROs. Your long-term development plans and anything related to pricing or costs. We will be also unable to answer questions about vendors, costs of using or implementing any of Trancelerate's assets or tools, and which specific member companies are using our assets and tools. Next slide, please. I wanted to give a shout out and a huge thank you to all of our team members that supported us in the development of the Personalized Clinical Trials Framework. We couldn't have done it without you if you're on the line. And if these are some of your colleagues, again, just a huge thank you to all of their support in the development of what we're going to be sharing with you today. Next slide, please. We have two of our team members from the Patient Experience Initiative joining us today who will present all that they have been involved in developing the Personalized Clinical Trials Framework. They're also subject matter experts representing two of our member companies. My name is Ashley Pachter. I am the event coordinator. I'm a program director with Trancelerate, and I'd like to introduce you to and welcome our two panelists. First, Kathyjo, Patient Engagement and Clinical Strategy Manager with Astellas. And second, Whitley, Albright, Site and Patient-Focused Innovation Project Manager with Sanofi. Without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing Kathyjo Shay. Kathyjo, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ashley. Next slide, please. And the next slide, thank you. So today we would like to explore with you why personalizing the experience clinical trial experience is important to our participants. We also want to share with you and introduce you to 14 opportunities that you can use to enable that patient choice across a clinical trial journey. And then also within that framework are some tools and resources to enable the implementation of some of these approaches. Next slide, please. We'll walk through some information around why personalizing the clinical trial experience is important and explore that a bit with you and share that overview of the framework and some key considerations for utilizing the framework at your organization. And then as we summarize, we'll also come back and review some of this information and then walk into the question and answer session with you. Next slide, please. We invite you to download the webinar handout. You may have seen it in your invitation. If not, it will be provided. But within that handout, you'll find some important links. One is to the personalized clinical trial framework itself, as well as other Transcelerate materials and resources. Next slide, please. We'd like to start with a polling question to just understand your perspectives at this point as we move into this webinar. When you think of a personalized clinical trial, what does that mean to you? Which of these options resonates with you? Does it mean patient insights informing the trial design, bringing the clinical trial closer to the patient, inclusive recruitment efforts, or communicating in a way that is meaningful to the patient? Please make a selection. Great. Well, this is interesting and somewhat expected. As we notice, there's not one answer that necessarily stands out as the only reason to personalize a clinical trial experience. We all have individual perspectives as to what's important, as well as our patients. So let's take a look at that a little bit further. Next slide, please. And the next, please. So when starting this exploration, the team at Transcelerate interviewed or surveyed patients who had participated in clinical trials to understand what their past experiences were like. We wanted to see what efforts were actually meaningful to them. Learned that around 80% of participants in prior trials said that having options greatly or somewhat improved their clinical trial experience. So exploring that a little bit further in that survey and through some patient panel interviews, go to the next slide, please. We wanted to understand which of these efforts really was meaningful, which one or two, or maybe four are the ways to go as far as personalizing clinical trials. And what we learned was there's not one answer. As individual as people are, what's considered a personalized clinical trial experience is also very individual. But in looking further into what the responses were, we learned that you see some trends here, some things around communication, engagement, providing support, as well as modernizing or DCT approaches to clinical trials. So in taking this further, the team looked at ways to categorize these and move forward in something of a framework, and this began the basis for the framework. Next slide, please. While we know that an important component of a person's healthcare experience might be participation in a clinical trial, this might be an important consideration, and it might be the important right step. However, we also understand that it can be very burdensome in time and effort. The goal of this personalized clinical trials is to integrate the clinical trial requirements more seamlessly into the lives of patients and participants and their families. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Whitley to provide an overview of what the framework actually is and how to use it. Whitley?
Thank you, Kathyjo. Good morning, everybody. Afternoon. We will take our first look at a personalized clinical trial framework in just one moment. Next slide, perfect. So first, before we dive into the framework, I want to highlight that this wasn't built just on the assumptions of Transcelerate team members. You saw what Kathyjo provided the survey done of patients, but we also brought in multiple stakeholders at various times of development in this framework to give their thoughts, their feedback, and to take that into consideration and adjust the opportunities, take out opportunities or add, depending on what those stakeholders said. So by utilizing their feedback, we were able to develop an integrated approach to personalizing clinical trials for a variety of patients, including diverse populations and multicultural audiences. So really making sure that we brought all those perspectives back to the table to inform the development here. Several organizations also contributed to the feedback. SysScript and SCRS enabled engagement with patients and sites respectively. So we appreciate that input. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this is your first look at the Personal Clinical Trials Framework. Unless you've gone to the website and clicked through it yourself already. I would encourage everyone at this point to look in the chat and click on the link to the framework so that you can walk through this with me. I think that's probably the best way to get comfortable with how to use it and what's going to pop up and where. So again, the link is in the chat or in the handout if you have that open. So what is the Personalized Clinical Trials Framework? It is a framework of 14 opportunities. You can see how they're listed and categorized in the picture in front of you for sponsors to enable personal choice in a clinical trial. And we do say sponsors here, but you can see through several of the names that you see here on the screen, the opportunities, that these aren't just for sponsors, they're also for sites, and they can be utilized at different time points in each trial, in each phase of the trial. So let's go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. And you'll see, and you can go ahead and play the video, that would be great. You'll see in the video, as you click on each of the question marks, you'll get a drop down from each of those trial phases. And the drop down is sharing questions that a patient might have at each phase of the trial. And so our opportunities below each of those phases seek to inform you on how to answer some of those questions, how we can improve communication surrounding some of those questions, and how we can pre-plan so that patients don't have those questions. And I would like to call out that down at the bottom, you can see the legend, and each of those opportunities are they're color coded to a specific category. So you've got the blue, which is our remote clinical trials methods, which really closely ties into a DCT, or what we've always called DCT in the last several years. Those have grown. And so those opportunities group together. Then you see a lot of orange on the page, and that orange represents our engagement opportunities, which is really exciting to see that, a lot of the feedback came through that we can just increase how we engage and ways we engage with patients and really improve experience. And then the pink is the support opportunities. All right, so we'll go to the next slide. Perfect. And you'll see that as you click on each of the opportunities, so it'll highlight the box, you go ahead and click on that opportunity, and then we'll go to the next slide, please. And then you'll have this pop up. And I want to highlight just very quickly a technical detail. So over on the right, you'll see an X, and that is how you will close out of the opportunity and go, click somewhere else. So it's not just clicking outside of the box that will take you out of that to allow you to click into the next opportunity. So we'll move on now to the pop-up boxes themselves. Have so much information. It's a treasure trove of what this is, how to implement tools and resources. It's very exciting. Under each one, there are a variety of resources that we'll be able to point you to. So here in this picture, you see that just the initial name, the drive awareness for this opportunity, along with the description. So you have a longer title that gives you a little bit of a flavor for what drive awareness means to us and how this was developed. And then you have a little bit of a background, and then a beginning to that conversation of the actions to be taken in the opportunity description. So on the next slide, we'll be able to see some of the meat of each of these categories, and you have considerations to help action the opportunity. So it's going to give you steps, very tangible steps that you can take. Perhaps you're already implementing step 1 and 2, or item 1 and 2, but you haven't thought about item number 3. And so it gives you a chance to look at something maybe in a bigger picture, and feel out how there may be just a little bit more that you could do, or maybe you haven't had a chance to take any action on driving awareness, and this just gives you several different ideas that you could possibly action, and you can kind of pick and choose if implementation of everything suggested here isn't appropriate for your organization. The value and potential benefits section, why would you do this? Why would you spend the money, the resources, the time, whatever it may be, to make this thing happen? And we hope to highlight those in that value and potential benefits section. And you'll see something very different in each one, the value it brings to your patients, your sites, your company. So highlighting all kind of areas of that. And then we'll go to the next slide, and you'll see here that we've also provided tools and resources for each of these opportunities. They're varied. They come from different organizations. You'll see that several do come from Transcelerate and from other patient experience initiatives, such as the Gratitude Toolkit or the Study Participant Feedback Questionnaire. So you'll see that those were developed earlier, and now we've built the framework and how to use those, which is super exciting. It's just a step-by-step. You can plug and play and put these in. And it's not just Transcelerate. Again, other organizations that have amazing tools out there, we're encouraging you to leverage those. We're providing the list so it really just makes it easy for you, but it is not an exhaustive list. To be clear, we have pulled in the ones that are known to us, or that we know that there's benefit, but there are new things coming up all the time. There are other organizations producing phenomenal material. So make sure you pick and choose what is appropriate for you, and know that this is just here to help inform your implementation. All right, so on the next slide, we're just going to look at the overview of the framework again, and just kind of sit here and think about these different opportunities for a moment. As I said earlier, a lot of these are that kind of orangey color and signify the engagement category. And these are things that may be a lighter lift than some of the things that are in blue. And so we encourage you to click through each one and understand what would this require of us? Is this something we're doing already? Is this something that would bring a huge amount of benefit to our patients, even if it's a heavy lift? Evaluating that impact versus input, that balance for you, because it's going to be different for everybody who looks at this specific framework. So it may be that you realize you could easily implement something where you're expressing gratitude to your patients. You're using the Transcelerate Gratitude Toolkit, and you can plug that in to the end of an ongoing study, right? It doesn't have to be a study that is at its inception. You're gathering feedback from patients at the very beginning. Some of these things can be plugged in mid-study, which is really exciting. But some of those things, if you do them early, right, you're getting that patient feedback very early, the co-design and delivery aspect of engagement. Your whole trial, the life of that trial is going to see the benefit from that information coming from the patient, being pulled in and feeding the rest of the study. So absolutely click through, see what makes sense to you, and realize that some things are heavier lift. Don't be discouraged if the first thing you click on seems like a huge process and workflow kind of reorganization for your company. Maybe look at one of the other opportunities and come back to that and put that on your long-term plan for implementation. All right, next slide, please. So I'm sure it's fairly obvious that personalization can benefit all of us, not just patients, and having more opportunities to see a trial the way that works for them and participate in a trial that works with their life, but also can improve relationship with sites and free up resources, because we're making a trial, again, that fits that patient. Maybe they're doing their visits a little bit differently, or they're more engaged, so the site has less engagement tasks, the sponsors providing more tools. And then absolutely it brings benefit to each of the sponsors that choose to implement. It, as we just talked about, that early engagement, it brings benefit through the entire trial. And then that later engagement, maybe you just didn't implement the Gratitude Toolkit, or you're checking in with the patient at the end on how their experience was on that specific trial, that's going to be taken back to another study. That's going to inform the development of your next protocol, and your gratitude being shown to the patient so openly is going to improve the relationship with that patient. They may come back to a study, do another study in the future, definitely just enhancing your, the brand of your company as well. But you're better able to plan with all of these things in process early, pulling them through the life of the trial. All right, next slide, please. And some of the considerations, we've talked about a few already, but thinking about how they may be incorporated into your health literacy and participant engagement strategy. I'm sure that everybody already has something ongoing here. How can these things be plugged in and work within the ecosystem you already have begun and are working through? And then I'm sure that we have people on the call. We have people registered for this call from all parts of the globe. And those local laws and regulations are going to look incredibly different in each of those areas. So, of course, consideration of how those fit in your region is super important, and we want to encourage you to look into that individually. And then understanding the needs of all the relevant stakeholders is critical, right? And being able to put this into play at your organization, it's a lot of conversations. It's understanding what everybody needs and hopes to see out of implementation of any of these opportunities. And then this is so important. The one size does not fit all mentality here is critical, right? That is the kind of the basis of this whole thing, is that one trial size does not fit all of the participants, right? So we need to offer those options that they can pick up and maybe say no thank you to this, but yes to this, and make sure that the options that we're bringing to the table are those that the patient wants to see, that we're not just, hey, this is something we're doing, it's great that we're doing it. No, it is the appropriate thing for that targeted population. So getting that early information again feeds down the line and making sure those options are appropriate. And then while each of these opportunities we've talked about could be like a plug and play, you can use some of them, you don't have to use all of them, of course, but when you do use all of them together, you will see the maximum benefit and see those maybe participation increase, satisfaction increase, because you're accounting for all of those opportunities where we could make things easier for our patients and bring their thoughts to the table to inform the development. So, all right, next slide, please. And I will hand it back to Kathyjo to summarize for us.
Thank you, Whitley. That's a great overview, and thanks so much for sharing that. Next slide, please. So what we're asked for you to do now is consider viewing the Personalized Clinical Trials Framework. As Whitley suggested, click through and start thinking about where these different capabilities and opportunities can fit into your current workflow, into your company's objectives, and see where you can work those in now into things you're doing. Also, consider partnering with others, with sites, with patients, patient organizations, to understand what it truly means to be personalized. And as Whitley mentioned as well, is just by saying, I'm going to offer this service, doesn't mean it's going to fit the trial. So understand your trial participants, the diversity of your trial participants, what their needs are, and then look at this framework and see where in this framework are there some opportunities that you can bring into your study. We invite you to take some time with that. Talk to others in your company, talk to your sites. Planning is key. That's one area that we've noticed in talking through all of these is you need appropriate planning. Take the time to review the options you have now and see where you might be able to enable some new opportunities. It's not a checklist. It's certainly not something you have to go through and say, I've done all of it. That wouldn't be right for every trial. And then also, as you leverage this framework, we would like you to let us know what your thoughts are. How is this working for you? Communicate with us and tell us what you think the framework is enabling at your company or at your site. Next slide, please. We also offer many tools and resources through Transcelerate. Visit Transcelerate's website and you'll see quite a few options there and quite a few deliverables over time. Stay connected with us, please. Sign up for our awareness and implementation community. Be informed about events like this. As well, learn about the solutions that were delivered in the past, and follow us on social media. Transcelerate is really encouraging communication and engagement, and to see where this organization can continue to support our clinical trial resources. The next slide, please. Before we wrap up with this summary and go into question and answer, we'd like to take another poll. We'd like to understand how confident you feel that you could use this framework to incorporate more options for participant choice in future studies. Great. It's really, really great to see that we see some confidence here, and that's really very telling, and we're encouraged that you're starting to look at this framework. But please, we'd like to see you gain confidence in using this, get familiarity with it, take some time to look through, and then as well, respond to Transcelerate. Let the team know what you think is an option for your work going forward. So thank you, that's very informative. The next slide, please. So here, thank you. We appreciate your taking the time to learn about this new deliverable from Transcelerate, to explore some of these options for bringing a more personalized clinical trial experience to your participants and to your sites and to your companies. So thank you.